What is the tenant's responsibility at this point?
Yes, they are serving the owners as well as the property, i.e. any tenants living in the owner's property. It is a standard practice. It does not involve any money owed by the tenant to the owner. So even though the tenant was served with a copy of the foreclosure lawsuit, it does not mean that the plaintiff is trying to make the tenant responsible for the debt of the owner. The tenant does not have to respond to the court. If they choose to, I would strongly suggest any questions before they do this to consult an attorney.
This is happening frequently. My daughter, who had a rental in Neptune Beach last year, was actually served 2 different times during her year that she lived in the house, and every time it happened, she didn't know what to do or what was going on. The next thing we'll talk about this morning, is there any law that protects the tenant at this point?
Actually, there is. Before May 20th of 2009, most renters lost their leases upon foreclosure. This rule was changed on May 20th, 2009 by an act signed by the President called Protecting Tenants at Foreclosure Act of 2009. This act provides you have a written lease. The lease will survive a foreclosure, meaning the tenant with a written lease could stay at least until the end of their lease. If you have a month-to-month or a verbal lease, you will be given 90 days notice before you have to move out. The only exception to this, if the buyer of a foreclosed property wants to move into the property and make it their primary residence, then the tenant would be given the 90 days notice to move out.
Does the tenant still have to pay their rent?
Yes, the tenant still has to pay their rent to the owner. If they don't, they can be evicted by going through the same process if there was no foreclosure involved and they just didn't pay their rent.
Can the tenant refuse to pay the rent but instead put the rent into an escrow account?
I've heard and been asked this question a lot. Actually, there is no recognized mechanism or law for putting the rent into an escrow account prior to the litigation. And the tenant would be very well advised to seek the advice of an attorney before ever doing this.
There's a relatively new term that we're hearing a lot, which is a short sale. Could you tell us what this means?
Short sale is nothing more than a sale where the payoff the bank takes is less money than what is actually owed. It is simply a sale just like any other sale as far as the tenant is concerned. And it is just like any other sale, and the lease survives unless there is a termination on sale or contract clause in the original lease agreement.
I'm going to add a little here also. With the short sales, a lot of people think just because they're upside down in their property or they owe more on the property than what it can be sold for, that they can do a short sale. But they actually have to have a hardship. And there are many hardships that would qualify that a lender would consider adequate. A death, a divorce, a medical bills, losing your job. There's a whole list of things that would be a hardship. But the person also has to be financially insolvent. They have to owe more money than they have in liquid cash or assets that could be used to pay down the mortgage. So there are many successful short sales being done right now. It is a great alternative to foreclosure, but you just cannot do it unless you have a hardship and you are financially insolvent. That concludes our presentation this morning, and we will be answering any of the questions you may have typed in. So we will start this morning with our first question. Elsie, what would you advise tenants to be aware of when looking for a property to rent?
My first advice would be to be very careful. Just for one example, right now there is a very large scam going on Craigslist where a property is being advertised that's vacant. The scammer is getting from a legitimate property that is for rent, and they're advertising it themselves. They usually offer it at a reduced rent, and when you call, they request a security deposit, and they'll send you the keys, which usually doesn't happen. But normally, once they have your deposit, you'll never hear from them again. We had a couple arrive in our office to pick up the keys for their new rental property. They had seen this and advertised and contacted the person from the website, sent them a security deposit, and were told to pick up the keys at our office. Interesting thing about this was the property was one of our sales listings that the scammer took advertised it as a rental at a very low price. These people were out their security deposit that they had sent to this person, and they did not have a place to move into. Fortunately, we were able to help them find a rental, but they were still out the money they had sent. The old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. A lot of prospective tenants are choosing to go through a property management company as opposed to renting directly from an individual owner, as they feel that perhaps they as a tenant may be more protected against owners going into foreclosure. There is a solvency statement that the owner signs stating that they are current on their mortgage, etc.
What is the normal amount for a security deposit?
Usually a security deposit is equal to 1 month's rent. Sometimes you'll see it's $50 less or more than the rent. This is purely accounting, for accounting purposes. Again, several years ago, when you rented a property, you paid first month's, last month's, plus security. Today, usually you'll find the first month plus the security deposit. Tenants need to be aware the security deposit is held in a separate account, not to be used as the last month's rent, only to be used upon move out if there is any damage.
What do I do if I have bad credit? Can I be approved to rent?
My strong suggestion to anybody looking for a rental, as in everything else, be honest and upfront about your credit. I see some prospective tenants, I guess, play the odds that we're really not going to run a credit check, and therefore don't say anything if they have bad credit. Personally, if a prospective tenant is honest with me upfront about credit problems, I will try to work with them any way possible. There are a lot of people, given the economy, going through hard financial times. Good people who want to pay everything on time, and they've always had sterling credit, but not anymore. It's really nothing to be embarrassed about. Just be honest and explain your situation. You are probably more likely to be accepted.
I've been told the maximum rental period in Florida is a 12-month lease. Is this true?
No, it's not true. You can have a 12-month lease. Florida law states that anything over a 12-month lease, the signatures of the tenant and the owner have to be witnessed by 2 people each. You can have a 2, 3, 5-year lease. They just have to be witnessed after the 12-month period.
Thank you so much, Elsie, for sharing with us this morning. And that concludes our presentation, and we don't have any more questions at that time. So thank you for joining us, and I hope you will join us on some of our future webinars.